Believe it or not, when she doesn't call, when she doesn't text, when her name stops lighting up your phone, it's not silence, it's a message. Not the kind she speaks with words, but the kind that hits you in the quiet. You feel it in your chest, in the space between notifications that never come, and your mind starts whispering. Did I say too much? Did I do something wrong? Did she move on? But here's the truth, most men never understand. Her silence says more than any text ever could. Because in that silence, she's not just revealing who she is, she's revealing who you are. You see, every moment she doesn't reply, she's giving you a choice. To chase noise or to master stillness. To spiral into need or to rise into presence. To lose yourself in confusion or to find yourself in calm. And once you understand that silence isn't punishment, it's a mirror, you'll never look at her quiet the same way again. So today, we're not going to talk about playing it cool. We're going to go deeper into what her silence really means, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. And by the end of this video, you won't just understand her, you'll understand yourself. Because when you stop fearing her silence, you start hearing your own power. Every man has felt it that slow, hollow, quiet. After the message you sent disappears into nothing. No reply, no dots, no closure, just silence. But here's what most men never realize. Silence isn't the absence of communication. It is communication, just not the kind you've been trained to understand. When a woman stops calling, stops texting, or pulls her energy away, your first instinct is to take it personally. You assume she's losing interest. That something you said, or something you didn't say, pushed her away. You start dissecting the past, every emoji, every tone, every delay, as if decoding her silence will give you control again. But brother, what if her silence has nothing to do with you? What if it's not rejection but reflection? Women don't always go quiet because they're done. Sometimes they go quiet because they're thinking, processing, feeling. They retreat into silence, not to hurt you, but to protect themselves from emotions they're not ready to face, from feelings they can't yet name, from vulnerability they fear will consume them if they speak too soon. You see, men and women communicate differently, not just in words, but in rhythm. Men communicate to solve. Women communicate to feel. And when a woman feels too much, too fast, too deeply, silence becomes her defense. It's not avoidance. It's containment. That's why sometimes her not texting isn't rejection. It's her trying to slow down what her heart is racing to keep up with. And if you panic in that space, if you flood her with double messages, or spiral into anger, or start proving your worth, you break the very thing her silence was trying to preserve: respect. Because here's a truth, most men ignore women. Notice how you handle their silence. If you stay calm, she feels safety. If you spiral, she feels pressure. And pressure kills attraction faster than distance ever could. Silence is the space where she observes your strength, not your words. Not your status, but your energy when nothing goes your way. It's the quiet arena where your emotional discipline is tested. The modern man has been conditioned to fear the gap, to believe that instant communication equals connection, but real connection doesn't live in constant contact. It lives in tension, the kind of tension that reveals truth. Let me tell you something about that tension. It's sacred. It's where polarity lives. Because when she pulls back, she's unconsciously asking, are you the kind of man who collapses without validation, or are you the kind who stays grounded no matter who walks away? Most men fail that test. They chase, they beg, they try to fill the silence with proof that they matter. But every message they send from insecurity is another drop of weakness that drains their mystery until there's nothing left to chase. A woman's silence is never random. It's data. Sometimes it's exhaustion. Sometimes it's disappointment. Sometimes it's her trying to regain control of emotions that scared her with their intensity. But sometimes, and this is where most men miss it, her silence isn't about you at all. It's about her life, her stress, her emotions, her need for stillness. The problem is that your ego hates uncertainty. It equates silence with threat, because silence means you're no longer in control. And men who can't sit in uncertainty will always destroy what could have been peace. So the Stoic response is not to decode her silence, but to understand your own reaction to it. Why does it trigger you? Why do you feel invisible when she doesn't respond? Why does her lack of attention feel like a loss of identity? That's the real question. Because if your self-worth depends on her validation, then her silence will always control you. But if your self-worth is rooted in discipline, purpose, and inner calm, then her silence only amplifies your strength. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Her silence is that outside event. You can't control it. You can't predict it. You can only control what it awakens within you. So when she pulls back, don't chase. Don't explain. Don't perform. Let her space be space. Let her quiet be quiet. Because if you can't respect her silence, she'll never trust your presence. You see, attraction isn't built in conversation, it's built in contrast. The contrast between your calm and her confusion, between your stillness and her storm, that's what creates polarity. That's what makes a man unforgettable. So next time she doesn't call, doesn't text, doesn't reply, don't ask, "Why is she quiet?" Ask, "What is this silence trying to teach me?" Because once you stop fearing the silence, it stops being punishment. It becomes clarity. It becomes your edge. It becomes the echo of your self-control, something no text could ever convey. Remember this, she may not be speaking to you, but the silence still speaks. And if you listen with strength instead of fear, you'll realize something profound. Her silence doesn't define your worth. It reveals your peace. Uncertainty is a battlefield most men lose before the first strike is even thrown. Not because the enemy is stronger, but because they never learned how to stand still when the ground beneath them shakes. When she doesn't call, when she doesn't text, the modern man treats it like an emergency. His chest tightens. His hand twitches toward his phone. And suddenly his entire worth is hanging on a message that never arrives. Hours feel like days. Minutes feel like proof that something is wrong. But Stoicism flips this script. Where the average man sees silence as a threat, the Stoic sees it as training. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Her silence isn't your downfall. Your reaction to her silence is, think about it. Every time you let her lack of response dictate your mood, you hand her the keys to your peace. You say, without speaking, "My happiness belongs to you. My calm depends on you. My worth is measured by your attention." That isn't love. That isn't attraction. That's slavery. The Stoic refuses those chains. He doesn't panic at the void. He doesn't scramble to close the gap. He doesn't live in the prison of what-ifs. Instead, he steps back and breathes. He lets the uncertainty sit, and in that stillness, something shifts, the power returns to him. You see, silence is not an obstacle. It's an invitation to practice mastery over the one thing you can control yourself: your thoughts, your emotions, your actions. Most men have never trained this muscle. They've been conditioned by a culture of instant gratification. Text back fast, react fast, consume fast. They don't know how to wait without collapsing. But waiting with strength, that's where a man separates himself from the crowd. When you choose not to react, you're not ignoring her. You're investing in yourself. You're sending a message far louder than any desperate text: "I am whole," with or without your response. Imagine this scene. Two men experience the same silence. The first man checks his phone every 10 minutes, sending double texts, leaving voice messages, apologizing for things he never did wrong. She sees it, and she knows his peace lives in her pocket. The second man notices the silence, breathes, and continues his day. He trains, he works, he builds, he reflects. By the time her message finally comes, he's already stronger than when she left. Which man do you think she respects? Which man do you think she thinks about more? It's never the one who begged for attention. It's the one who didn't need it. The Stoic response is not coldness. It's not arrogance. It's composure. It's knowing that your world doesn't shrink. When she goes quiet, it expands. It expands because now, instead of being consumed by her absence, you pour energy into your presence, into your mission, into your growth. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Her silence is an outside event. You don't get to control it. You don't get to script her response, her timing, or her feelings. But you always control how you meet the silence. And here's the paradox. The less you try to control her, the more powerful you appear. Because a man who can't sit in uncertainty without breaking reveals fragility. A man who can sit in silence, calm and steady, reveals strength. And strength is magnetic. Women don't consciously say it, but they feel it. The man who doesn't crumble under silence is the man who can be trusted with storms. He doesn't just attract, he anchors. So when the silence stretches longer than your comfort allows, don't interpret it as loss. Interpret it as practice. Every hour she doesn't respond is an hour to sharpen your edge. Every day of quiet is another day to train your discipline. Because when the silence finally breaks, it shouldn't find you weaker, it should find you stronger. Not a man who sat by the window waiting for validation, but a man who built himself in the meantime. This is the Stoic response. Not to chase, not to beg, not to fear, but to stand still, unshaken, unbothered. And in that stillness, something remarkable happens. You stop needing her words to define your worth. You stop fearing her silence. You start hearing your own voice again, the voice of the man you were always meant to become. That is the power of uncertainty when met with discipline. It doesn't weaken you. It forges you. Every man thinks he's strong until silence enters the room. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that stretches, lingers, and makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. When she stops replying, when she disappears into that digital fog, your mind begins to whisper, lies, she's lost interest, you weren't enough, you should do something. But here's what you need to understand. Her silence isn't always a rejection. Often, it's a test, not a game, not manipulation, a test of your center. See, women don't test you with questions like, are you strong, or can I trust you? They test you with silence, because silence reveals what no conversation ever could. It's the unseen moment when she steps back, consciously or unconsciously, to see what you'll do when attention, validation, and control are taken away. She's not watching your words. She's watching your stability. She's asking, without saying a thing, can you hold your ground when I pull away? Can you stay composed when I stop feeding your ego? Can you remain who you are when I stop making you feel seen? Most men fail this test. They crumble the moment connection is withdrawn. They send double texts, over-explain, or apologize for things that were never wrong. They beg for reassurance. And in doing so, they confirm her deepest fear. This man's peace depends on me. And once she senses that, the dynamic shifts permanently. Because now, instead of being drawn to your energy, she feels responsible for it. Instead of feeling safe with your presence, she feels burdened by your insecurity. That's not attraction. That's emotional pressure. But when you remain calm in the face of her silence, when you don't chase, when you don't panic, when you simply continue moving forward, you communicate something far more powerful than words ever could. You are not controlled by her emotions. You are in command of your own. That's the moment she starts seeing you differently. Because, while every other man fights for her attention, you fight for your composure. And that contrast, it's magnetic. Women are instinctively drawn to emotional strength, not because they want dominance, but because they crave stability in a chaotic world. A man who cannot be moved by silence is a rare presence. He becomes an anchor in the storm. Think of it this way: when she goes silent, it's not always about her losing interest. Sometimes, it's her way of measuring your depth. She wants to know if your calm is real, or if it collapses the moment she steps back. And when she sees that your peace is self-sustaining, that it doesn't shatter under uncertainty, she feels something she can't explain. respect, safety, curiosity, respect, because you didn't crumble, safety, because your emotions aren't fragile, curiosity, because she can't easily predict you anymore. And when a woman can't predict you, she can't stop thinking about you. This is the paradox of emotional strength. The less you try to prove it, the more she feels it. You don't announce composure, you embody it. You don't talk about confidence, you radiate it. And the man who radiates calm doesn't need to chase attention, because attention finds him naturally. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Applied here, it means the best response to emotional withdrawal is not to withdraw emotionally in return, it's to stay grounded, to remain the mountain while she shifts like the wind. Because mountains don't chase storms, they let storms pass. The modern man has forgotten this truth. He mistakes reaction for power. But power doesn't rush. Power doesn't beg. Power doesn't panic when attention fades. Power simply is. So when she tests you with silence, don't see it as punishment. See it as proof. Proof that you've reached a moment to practice mastery over yourself. Your composure isn't something she can give you or take away. It's something you build in solitude. And when you can meet her silence with stillness, with discipline, with quiet confidence, something beautiful happens. She begins to feel your presence more deeply than she ever did when you were speaking. Because silence, when held with strength, becomes a language of its own. It says, "I don't need you to validate me. I don't chase uncertainty. I choose peace over panic." And that message, it doesn't just echo in her mind. It lingers in her emotions. Every time she wonders why you haven't reacted, she feels your control. Every time she compares your calm to another man's chaos, she remembers your restraint. And every time she's tempted to test you again, she knows this man doesn't break. That's not arrogance. That's discipline. That's masculine presence. That's what separates the ordinary from the unforgettable. So the next time she goes quiet, don't panic. Don't text. Don't chase. Hold the silence. Because that silence isn't empty. It's your moment to prove not to her, but to yourself, that your strength isn't dependent on anyone else's attention. That's what Stoicism teaches. Control the controllable. Release the rest. And in doing so, become the kind of man who doesn't just attract, he commands respect without ever saying a word. Every man who has ever lost his peace did so chasing noise, not because she stopped caring, but because he couldn't handle the stillness. When a woman goes silent, most men panic. They start texting, apologizing, explaining, chasing, not because they love her, but because they can't stand the vacuum her silence creates. They mistake movement for progress and reaction for connection. But here's the brutal truth: the moment you start chasing her silence, you stop being the man she was once drawn to. Because attraction isn't built on pursuit, it's built on polarity. It's the tension between your presence and her curiosity. And the moment you chase, you collapse that tension. When you text again and again, hoping to pull her attention back, what you're really saying is, "I can't exist without your validation." And nothing kills desire faster than need. In psychology, there's a principle called reactance. When someone feels their freedom being restricted, they instinctively pull away. It's the mind's way of protecting autonomy. So when she takes space, and you close the distance too soon, you don't draw her closer, you suffocate her. You turn what could have been curiosity into pressure. She begins to associate your presence with emotional weight, with the feeling of being watched, chased, cornered. And once that happens, she doesn't crave your energy anymore. She avoids it. You see, men often think they're fixing things when they reach out again. But what they're really doing is revealing their weakness, that desperate inability to sit in discomfort. And here's the paradox. The more you chase, the more she retreats. The more you explain, the less she listens. The more you try to convince, the less she believes. Because attraction isn't logical, it's emotional. And the emotion she needs to feel is freedom. A man who can't give her that freedom, even in silence, becomes a man she can't respect. Let's be clear, respect isn't built through dominance. It's built through restraint. It's built when you have every reason to react, and you don't. Because the man who remains composed under silence communicates a message she feels in her bones. This man doesn't chase approval, he commands it. That energy is rare. That's why it's powerful. Most men destroy attraction by trying to control it. They think if they just say the right thing, she'll come back. But attraction isn't something you control, it's something you allow. It breathes in space. It grows in mystery. When you chase, you kill the mystery. When you insist, you destroy the space. And when you destroy the space, you destroy the very thing that made her curious about you in the first place. Women don't fall for men who need them. They fall for men who don't flinch when they're gone. That doesn't mean you play games. It doesn't mean you ignore her out of pride. It means you hold your ground calmly, quietly, with self-respect. Because your silence, when anchored in strength, says more than 1,000 texts ever could. It says, I don't chase what's not ready to meet me. It says, I trust my energy enough to let go. It says, my peace is not negotiable. And that kind of energy, it makes her wonder. It pulls her back, not because you forced her to return, but because she felt your absence. There's a reason Stoic philosophers spoke so much about control. Not control over others, but control over self. Seneca wrote, he who is brave is free, and freedom, in this context, means not being enslaved by impulse. The impulse to text, the impulse to fix, the impulse to seek reassurance, because the man who cannot master his impulses will always be mastered by his emotions, and the man mastered by emotion will always lose power in silence. Let me paint a picture. She stops replying. You feel it immediately, that sting of uncertainty. You type a message, delete it, retype it, send it anyway. Hours later, you check her profile, her last scene, her story, over and over again. Each glance drains a little more of your dignity. Days pass. And when she finally texts you back, you don't feel victory, you feel emptiness. Because you didn't win her back. You lost yourself trying. That's the cost of chasing silence. It's not just her you lose. It's your edge, your energy, your masculine center. But when you choose stillness over reaction, something powerful happens. She feels your detachment. She senses your calm. And deep down, she starts to wonder, why isn't he chasing me? Why isn't he trying harder? What kind of man doesn't need to prove himself? And in that moment of wonder, the polarity flips. Now she's the one thinking. She's the one replaying. She's the one reaching. Because nothing haunts a woman more than a man who can walk away with grace. So remember this. Every time you chase, you lose a piece of your power. Every time you hold your silence, you reclaim it. Let her feel your absence, not as punishment, but as presence. Let your stillness speak for you. Because when you stop chasing noise, you become the kind of man whose silence echoes louder than words ever could. When silence enters the room, most men panic. They treat it like a void to be filled, a problem to be solved, a gap that needs immediate closure. But what if I told you the silence is not the enemy, it's the forge, it's the very space where men are tested, where boys crumble and where warriors are born. Here's the truth. Stillness isn't weakness. Stillness is energy conserved, sharpened, and transformed. It's what separates the man who waits helplessly for her attention from the man who uses that gap to expand himself until he no longer needs it. Think of it this way. While she scrolls, you evolve. While she wonders, you build. 1. Don't wait. Build. Most men waste silence by sitting in it like prisoners. They stare at their phones, overanalyze messages, and replay conversations in their heads. They're waiting for something external to set them free. But the Stoic knows freedom never comes from the outside. It comes from mastery within. Instead of waiting, you build. Build your body, so your presence radiates strength without words. Build your mind, so your thoughts cut sharper than any compliment. Build your mission, so your life moves forward with or without her. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." Every minute you waste checking your phone is a minute lost in becoming the man she cannot forget. 2. Transform energy. Don't bleed it. Emotions are energy. Anxiety, longing, even desire, they're all raw fuel. Most men spill that energy outward, texting, chasing, over-explaining. But the high-value man redirects it inward. He takes the same restless energy and transforms it into reps at the gym, into pages written in a journal, into progress on his craft. Psychologists call this sublimation, channeling restless emotion into higher forms of creation. To her, it might just look like you went quiet. But in reality, you were in motion. And when she finally looks back, she doesn't see a man who was waiting. She sees a man who was working. 3. The cinematic contrast. Imagine this scene. She's lying in bed, scrolling through her phone. Half distracted, half bored, she opens your chat, sees the last message she never replied to. For a moment, she wonders, why hasn't he followed up? Why hasn't he tried harder? And then the contrast hits her, because while she's lost in distraction, you've been building. While she was fading into noise, you were sharpening into signal. Stillness creates contrast, and contrast creates attraction, because nothing haunts the human mind like the man who refuses to collapse when silence presses against him. 4. Stillness as presence. Here's where most men confuse the game. They think presence means being available, always responding, always filling the air. But presence isn't about constant words. Presence is about the weight of your energy. A man anchored in stillness doesn't vanish. He intensifies. You can feel it in the way he walks into a room, in the calmness of his breath, in the steadiness of his gaze. That kind of presence cannot be ignored, because it's rare. Epictetus taught, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Stillness is the proof of that mastery. It shows you're not enslaved by reaction, not controlled by her silence, not moved by the shifting winds of attention. 5. The cinematic voice of the Stoic picture. This as a movie scene. She's out with her friends, laughing, distracted, barely thinking about you. Then her mind drifts back to the silence. She opens her messages, half expecting to see another text, another call, another attempt. But there's nothing, and in that nothing, she feels everything. Because that silence isn't empty, it's filled with the presence of a man who refused to break. Your stillness echoes. It makes her wonder where your energy went. And when she sees it later in your progress, your strength, your new glow, she realizes the silence wasn't absence. It was transformation. The Stoic reminder: silence will either enslave you or sharpen you. The difference is in what you do with it. The weak man lets it drain him. The Stoic man uses it as discipline, as meditation, as resistance training for the soul. When she doesn't text back, you don't collapse. You expand. When the space grows, you don't fill it with noise. You fill it with growth. And that's why stillness is not passive. It's the most active form of power. So the next time she goes silent, remember you've been handed a gift, not a punishment, but an opportunity, a blank page to write your story of resilience. Don't wait. Build. Build so much that by the time she looks back, she's not returning to the man she left. She's encountering someone stronger, sharper, more grounded than ever before. Because while she scrolls, you evolve. While she wonders, you build. And while the world waits for answers, you remain still, unshaken, unforgettable. Her silence may feel endless, but here's the paradox. Most men never see silence, rarely lasts forever. At some point, almost inevitably, she returns, maybe with a casual "Hey, how've you been?" Maybe with a random meme, maybe with a comment on something you posted. And in that moment, most men fail the test, not because she came back, but because they forget who they became in her absence. 1. Why she returns. Let's get one thing straight when she reappears. It's not always because she missed you romantically. Sometimes it's curiosity. Sometimes it's boredom. Sometimes it's ego, checking to see if she still has space in your mind. But none of that matters as much as this: she returned. And her return is not the victory. Your response is, psychologically, human beings are wired to re-engage with what feels rare. If you didn't chase, if you didn't beg, if you stayed calm in her silence, she begins to feel a pull back toward you, not because you tried harder, but because you stood still while others would have collapsed. 2. The 2 traps of return. When she comes back, most men fall into one of 2 traps. Trap 1, overeager relief. They explode with joy, reply instantly, and shower her with energy. In doing so, they reveal they were waiting all along, starving for validation. Trap 2, bitter punishment. They respond with guilt trips, anger, or coldness, trying to teach her a lesson. But bitterness communicates weakness too. It shows her she still controls your emotional state. The Stoic avoids both. He doesn't celebrate like a boy. He doesn't punish like a child. He responds like a man. 3. The Stoic response. So what does a Stoic response look like? Calm, grounded, minimal. She says, "Hey, how've you been?" You say, "Good. Been keeping busy with some new things." That's it. No over-explaining, not chasing, no dripping sarcasm or resentment. Just presence. Just enough to show her you've moved forward. Because remember, your power is not in making her feel guilty for leaving. Your power is in showing her you never lost yourself while she was gone. 4. You don't reward inconsistency. Here's the deeper truth when someone disappears and reappears. They're revealing their inconsistency, and inconsistency should never be rewarded. That doesn't mean you ignore her forever. It means you don't throw away the discipline you built in her silence just because she sent a few words. You hold your frame. You maintain your standard. Epictetus wrote, "You don't control her silence. You control your state." The same applies here. You don't control her return. You control your boundaries. If her return fits into the world, you're building good. If it doesn't, you continue forward. Either way, you remain unmoved. 5. The cinematic image. Picture this. She sends you a casual message after days or weeks of silence. She expects the old you, the one who would have leapt, who would have flooded her phone, who would have waited by the door like a loyal pet. But instead, she meets a new presence. Calm, confident, minimal. A man who seems bigger now, busier, fuller. Suddenly, she realizes the silence didn't starve you. It strengthened you. That realization is haunting, because in her mind, she expected to still have you. But now, she has to wonder, did I lose him while I was gone? And that wondering creates more attraction than any desperate message ever could. 6. Reframe her return. Here's the most important shift. Her return is not a gift to you. It's a mirror of you. It shows you how far you've come. Whether you've stayed grounded or slipped back into old patterns, if you stayed strong, her message won't shake you. If you slipped, her message will expose it. Either way, it's not about her. It's about you. 7. The Stoic closing. So when she returns, and she often will remember this, you don't owe her bitterness. You don't owe her relief. You owe yourself composure, because the man who doesn't need her to feel steady is the man she'll never forget. You don't reward inconsistency. You reflect composure. Her silence was never about her. It was always about you. That's the paradox men miss. They think her lack of texts is a judgment, a rejection, a sign they weren't enough. But the Stoic man knows better. He knows silence isn't punishment, it's reflection. It reveals not who she is, but who you are when no one is validating you. 1. Silence reveals your truth. Think about it. When the screen stays dark, when the phone stays quiet, what rises up inside you? Anxiety, fear, anger, need. That's not about her. That's about you. Silence exposes the cracks in your foundation. It shows you where you've been outsourcing your worth to her attention. It shows you whether you are a man centered in himself or a man waiting to be centered by someone else. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Her silence is one of those outside events. Neutral, empty, until you assign it meaning. 2. The mirror of power. Here's the truth. Every time she withholds her words, she gives you an X-ray of your own strength. If you collapse, it means you were still tethered to her validation. If you stand steady, it means you've begun to master yourself. And that's why silence is the greatest mirror a man can face. It forces you to see what you'd rather avoid. It asks, are you strong only when you're being praised, or are you strong even in the void? 3. The trap of noise. Most men run from this mirror. They cover it with noise, texting, chasing, distracting themselves with shallow connections. They'd rather drown in noise than face their own reflection. But the Stoic doesn't run. He stands still. He looks into the silence and lets it show him exactly where he's weak. And then, instead of begging for attention, he builds. He grows. Evolves. Because silence, when faced with courage, becomes the greatest teacher. 4. Her silence was about you all along. When she didn't text, it wasn't about her schedule. It wasn't about her interest. It was about your response. The silence was the stage. You were the actor. And here's the twist. She may never even realize the lesson she gave you. But you will. Because once you see yourself clearly in the mirror of silence, you can never unsee it. You realize her silence was never rejection. It was revelation. 5. The Stoic transformation. From this point forward, every time silence shows up, you no longer panic. You no longer spiral. You see it as a gift, a test of your center. Instead of thinking, why isn't she reaching out? You start asking, what is this teaching me about myself? Instead of chasing, you channel. Instead of needing, you become. That's what separates boys from men.